Richard Walker sits frozen at his corner table, his face drained of color as the waitress stands before him, her words still echoing through the upscale restaurant. The German phrase she just spoke cuts through him like glass, each syllable deliberate and sharp. His business partners exchange glances, their champagne glasses suspended mid-air. The laughter that filled their table moments ago has died completely. Richard's mouth opens, then closes, no sound emerging. Elena Sullivan doesn't move. She stands with the same quiet composure she's held for months, but now there's something different in her dark eyes. Power, knowledge, the kind of strength that comes from being underestimated for too long. The silence stretches between them, thick with years of assumptions and dismissals. Richard realizes with growing horror that she understood every cruel word, every joke, every sneer. She understood it all. Before we continue, tell me where you're listening from and tap subscribe so you never miss a story.
3 months earlier, Richard Walker controlled everything in his world. His restaurants, his investments, his image. He moved through life with the confidence of a man who'd never been told no, never been challenged, never been wrong. The Grand View restaurant was his crown jewel. Crystal chandeliers, marble floors, tables that cost more per night than most people earned in a month. Richard dined there twice a week, always at the same corner table, always with the same group of wealthy friends. Elena Sullivan had been working there for 6 months. She was quiet, efficient, invisible in the way service workers often become to the very rich. She spoke little, smiled when appropriate, and disappeared when not needed. Richard barely noticed her at first. She was just another face, another uniform moving through his evening. When he did acknowledge her existence, it was with the casual indifference of someone accustomed to being served. But Elena noticed everything. She watched how Richard treated the kitchen staff when he thought no one was looking. She saw how he spoke to the cleaning crew, how he dismissed the coat check girl with a wave of his hand. She listened to his conversations, his crude jokes about immigrants, his complaints about entitled workers, his assumptions about people who served food for a living. Elena said nothing. She brought his wine, cleared his plates, and accepted his minimal tips with the same steady expression. But behind her calm exterior, something was building. Richard's friends enjoyed their evenings at the Grand View. They felt important there, surrounded by luxury they could afford and people they could ignore. They spoke freely, loudly, about business deals and personal opinions. They spoke in German sometimes. Richard's grandfather had been German, and he'd learned the language in boarding school. His friends Mitchell Green and David Carter had studied abroad. They enjoyed the exclusivity of it, the way it made them feel worldly and sophisticated. More importantly, they enjoyed the privacy. German created a bubble around their table, a space where they could say anything without consequence. Or so they believed. Elena had been born in Munich. Her father was German, her mother American. She'd grown up bilingual, switching between languages as easily as breathing. But she'd learned early that in America, being too smart, too educated, too capable could work against you in certain jobs. So she kept her PhD in European literature to herself. She didn't mention her fluency in 4 languages. She let her intelligence remain invisible, just like the rest of her. Until tonight. Richard arrives with his usual group, settling into their corner table with familiar arrogance. Elena approaches with menus, her steps quiet on the marble floor. She can already sense the shift in their mood. They're agitated about something, their voices carrying an edge she recognizes. These are men accustomed to getting their way, and something has clearly disrupted their expectations. Elena sets down the menus and water glasses, preparing to retreat to her usual invisible position. But Richard's voice stops her. Not his words to her, his words about her. He's speaking in German, assuming she can't understand. His friends are laughing, nodding, adding their own comments. The conversation flows around her as if she is furniture, as if she has no ears, no feelings, no dignity worth considering. Alina's hands still as she adjusts the final water glass. Her face remains calm, professional, but something inside her begins to shift. She's heard enough German conversations in this restaurant to know where this leads. She knows the pattern, the escalation, the assumption that their words exist in a consequence-free bubble. Tonight, she decides, that bubble bursts. Alina straightens slowly, her eyes meeting Richard's across the table. For the first time in 6 months, she truly looks at him. Not through him, not around him, but directly at him. Richard doesn't notice the change. He's too absorbed in his performance, too confident in his linguistic shield. He continues speaking, his voice growing louder, more animated. Alina waits. She lets him dig deeper, let his friends join in, let their assumptions compound into something undeniable. Then, when Richard pauses for breath, when his friends lean back in satisfied laughter, Alina speaks. In perfect, flawless German. The words leave Alina's lips with surgical precision. She doesn't raise her voice, doesn't change her expression, but every syllable carries weight. She tells Richard exactly what she thinks of men who hide behind languages they assume others don't speak. She describes in clinical detail what his behavior reveals about his character. She uses German phrases so perfectly constructed, so devastatingly accurate, that his business partners actually wince. Richard's face transforms. Color drains from his cheeks, then floods back in a wave of humiliation. His mouth opens and closes like a fish pulled from water. Mitchell Green sets down his champagne glass with shaking hands. David Carter stares at Elena as if she's materialized from thin air. The assumption that held their world together for months has just shattered. Elena isn't finished. She switches to English, her voice still calm, still professional. "Will there be anything else this evening, gentlemen?" The question hangs in the air like a challenge. Richard realizes that everyone at nearby tables has stopped talking. The restaurant, usually filled with the comfortable buzz of expensive conversations, has gone quiet. Other staff members have noticed the shift. The sommelier pauses in his wine presentation. The hostess looks over from her podium. Even the kitchen doors seem to have stopped swinging. Elena waits for Richard's response with the same patience she's shown for 6 months. But now that patience feels different, not subservient, not invisible. It feels like strength. Richard tries to speak. He wants to apologize, to explain, to somehow reclaim control of the situation. But the words won't come. How do you apologize for months of assumptions? How do you explain away the casual cruelty of believing someone is beneath understanding your insults? His friends shift uncomfortably in their seats. The evening they'd planned, the familiar ritual of expensive food and careless conversation, has become something else entirely. Elena's eyes move from Richard to Mitchell to David, acknowledging each of them individually. For the first time, they see her as a person rather than a service. The recognition is uncomfortable, unavoidable. "I'll give you a few more minutes to decide," Elena says, her voice carrying just enough emphasis to make her meaning clear. This isn't about food anymore. This is about choice, about consequences, about what happens next. She turns to leave, her movements unhurried, controlled. But Richard finds his voice at last. "Wait!" The word comes out strangled, desperate. "Please wait!" Elena pauses but doesn't turn around. Her stillness speaks louder than any gesture could. She's given him 6 months of waiting, of serving, of being dismissed and ignored. Now it's his turn to wait. The restaurant around them seems to hold its breath. Other diners sense drama without understanding its source. Staff members watch from the corners of their eyes, recognizing that something fundamental has shifted. Richard stands slowly, his chair scraping against marble.
His friends remain seated, uncertain whether to stay or flee. The dynamic that has governed their relationship for decades is cracking. "We need to talk," Richard says, his voice barely above a whisper. Elena finally turns. Her expression hasn't changed, but there's something new in her posture. She's no longer the invisible waitress. She's a woman who has reclaimed her voice, her dignity, her right to be seen. "No," she says simply, "we don't." The refusal hits Richard like a physical blow. He's accustomed to people wanting to talk to him, needing his attention, seeking his approval. Elena's calm rejection overturns everything he's assumed about power, about worth, about who matters in the world. Elena walks away, leaving Richard standing beside his table, watched by a room full of strangers who now see him as she's always seen him. Small, cruel, unworthy of the respect he's demanded by right of wealth alone. The evening is over, but its consequences are just beginning.
Richard sinks back into his chair, his face burning with shame. The restaurant around him feels different now, hostile. Every whispered conversation seems to be about him. Every glance carries judgment. Mitchell and David avoid eye contact. They're calculating the damage to their own reputations, their own social standing. Being associated with public humiliation, even secondhand, carries risks they're not prepared to accept. "We should go," Mitchell murmurs, already reaching for his coat. Richard wants to protest, to pretend the evening can still be salvaged. But he can see the truth in his friends' faces. Some lines, once crossed, can't be uncrossed. They leave money on the table and slip out quickly, abandoning Richard to face the consequences alone. Their loyalty, he realizes, was always conditional on his maintaining the image they all protected together. Elena continues her shift with the same professional calm she's always shown. But other staff members look at her differently now. There's respect in their glances, recognition of something they'd sensed but never seen displayed. The restaurant manager approaches Richard's table, his manner carefully neutral. "Is everything satisfactory this evening, Mr. Walker?" Richard looks up at the man he's known for 2 years, a man who's always treated him with deferential respect. Now he sees something else in the manager's eyes: awareness, understanding. The manager knows what happened. He probably speaks German too. How many people in Richard's world have been watching, listening, understanding more than he ever realized? "Fine," Richard manages. "Everything's fine." But nothing is fine. The evening that began with familiar arrogance has become a reckoning. Richard sits alone at his corner table, surrounded by the luxury he's always used as armor, and feels more exposed than ever before. Elena serves other tables with the same quiet efficiency she's always shown. But Richard can't stop watching her, can't stop seeing her differently. The invisible woman has become visible. And with that visibility comes the uncomfortable recognition of everything he's refused to see. She's educated, intelligent, dignified in ways that have nothing to do with money or status. She's been serving him for months while possessing knowledge and capabilities he's never acknowledged, never respected, never even imagined. Richard tries to eat, but the food tastes like ash. Every bite reminds him of the conversations he's had at this table, the assumptions he's made, the casual cruelty he's displayed, while Elena stood silently nearby, understanding every word. He remembers specific evenings now, specific comments. The jokes about immigrants who couldn't speak English properly,
The complaints about entitled workers who didn't appreciate their jobs. The dismissive comments about people who served food for a living. Elena had heard it all. Elena had understood it all. Elena had endured it all with a grace he's never possessed, never earned, never deserved. The weight of his behavior settles on him like a physical thing. Not just tonight, but months of nights. Not just Elena, but all the invisible people he's dismissed, ignored, treated as less than human. Richard signals for his check, but another server approaches. Elena has apparently finished her shift, or perhaps she's simply chosen not to engage with him further. The new server is polite, efficient, unremarkable. Everything Elena was supposed to be in Richard's limited understanding of the world. As Richard signs his credit card receipt, he realizes he doesn't even know Elena's last name. 6 months of service, and he's never bothered to learn it. She's been a uniform, a function, a convenience, never a person. Richard leaves the restaurant alone, stepping into a night that feels colder than when he arrived. His car waits in the valet parking, sleek and expensive, and suddenly meaningless. He drives home to his penthouse apartment, surrounded by the luxury that has always defined his worth. But tonight, the space feels empty in ways that have nothing to do with physical presence. Tonight, Richard Walker learned what it means to be truly poor.
Richard doesn't sleep. He stands at his floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the city he's always seen as his domain. But the lights below look different now, each one representing lives he's never considered, stories he's never bothered to hear. He can't stop thinking about Elena. Not just her words, but her composure. The way she stood there, unbroken by months of his casual cruelty. The dignity she maintained even while delivering her devastating response. Richard has built his identity on being superior, on being above the struggles of ordinary people, but Elena showed him something he's never possessed: true strength. The kind that doesn't require putting others down, that doesn't depend on external validation, that survives being underestimated and dismissed. In the morning, Richard considers not returning to the Grand View. The thought of facing Elena, of enduring the knowing looks from staff and other diners, makes his stomach clench with anxiety. But avoidance feels like cowardice. He spent his life running toward confrontation, using his wealth and status as weapons. Now, faced with a battle he can't win through dominance, he doesn't know how to proceed. Richard calls the restaurant, intending to make a reservation. He wants to apologize, to somehow repair the damage he's done. But when the hostess asks for his name, he hesitates. "Richard Walker," he says finally. There's a pause, a brief, telling silence that confirms his fears. His name now carries weight in ways he never intended. "I'm sorry, Mr. Walker. We're fully booked for the next several weeks." It's not true, and they both know it. Richard has never needed a reservation before. His money, his status, his assumed importance have always guaranteed him a table. Now, for the first time in his adult life, he's been refused service. Richard hangs up, staring at his phone as if it might offer answers. How do you apologize to someone you can't reach? How do you repair damage when the person you've hurt won't give you the opportunity? He considers sending flowers, writing a letter, having his assistant make contact. But each option feels inadequate, calculated, wrong. Elena's response wasn't about grand gestures or expensive gifts. It was about recognition, respect, basic human dignity, things that can't be purchased. Richard spends the day researching Elena Sullivan. It's easier than he expected to find information once he knows her full name. PhD in European Literature from Columbia. Published articles on linguistic identity in immigrant communities.
teaching credentials that could have landed her positions at prestigious universities. She's been working as a waitress by choice, not necessity. The revelation hits Richard like a physical blow. Elena isn't trapped in service work. She's chosen it. Perhaps temporarily, perhaps for reasons he'll never understand. His assumptions about her circumstances, her education, her options were as wrong as his assumptions about her language skills. Richard has built his entire worldview on a foundation of ignorance and prejudice. The investigation yields one more piece of information: Elena's address, a modest apartment in a neighborhood Richard has driven through but never really seen. He considers showing up uninvited, using his presence to force the conversation she's refused to have. But something stops him. Perhaps it's the memory of her calm dignity, the way she had walked away without anger or dramatics. Elena Sullivan doesn't owe him anything. Not forgiveness, not explanation, not opportunity for redemption. For the first time in his life, Richard Walker has to live with the consequences of his actions without being able to buy, charm, or intimidate his way out of them. The evening comes, and Richard finds himself driving past the Grandview restaurant. Through the windows, he can see the familiar glow of crystal and candlelight, the comfortable movement of wealth at leisure. His table sits empty. Richard parks across the street and waits, though he's not sure what he's hoping to see. After an hour, Elena emerges from the staff entrance, walking with the same quiet composure she's always carried. She doesn't look toward his car, doesn't acknowledge his presence in any way. But as she disappears into the night, Richard realizes she knew he was there. Elena Sullivan sees everything. She always has. The question that haunts him now is whether she'll ever choose to see anything redeemable in him.
2 weeks pass without resolution. Richard finds himself driving past the restaurant, past Elena's apartment building, past places where their worlds might intersect. But he never stops, never approaches, never forces the confrontation his old self would have demanded. Elena's silence teaches him patience in ways no business deal ever could. Her absence makes him aware of his privilege, his assumptions, his fundamental misunderstanding of what makes a person worthy of respect. Then, unexpectedly, Richard sees her at a coffee shop near Columbia University. She's sitting alone, reading a book written in German, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Without her work uniform, she looks younger, more approachable, but still carries that same quiet dignity that shattered his world. Richard stands frozen outside the window, remembering another moment of paralysis. But this time, his stillness comes from respect rather than shock. Elena deserves to drink her coffee in peace, to exist in the world without being confronted by her past humiliations. He turns to leave, but Elena looks up. Their eyes meet through the glass, and Richard sees something he doesn't expect. Not anger, not satisfaction, but simple acknowledgement. Elena nods, a tiny gesture that somehow contains everything left unsaid between them. Recognition without forgiveness, understanding without absolution. Richard nods back, accepting what she offers. It's not what his ego wants, not the dramatic reconciliation his guilt craves, but it's what she's willing to give, and that makes it precious beyond calculation. Elena returns to her book, dismissing him with the same gentle finality she'd shown at the restaurant. Richard walks away, carrying the weight of lessons learned too late. He never goes back to the Grandview restaurant. The corner table that once represented his dominance over the world now symbolizes everything he failed to understand about power, respect, and human dignity. Richard's friends stop calling. Business associates find excuses to meet elsewhere. The social circle that once revolved around shared assumptions and casual cruelties slowly dissolves. But Richard finds something unexpected in his isolation. Without the constant validation of others who think like him, he begins to think differently. He notices the people he's never seen before,
The hotel cleaning staff who work while he sleeps, the security guards who protect his building, the countless invisible workers who make his comfortable life possible. He learns their names. He acknowledges their effort. He offers respect where he once offered indifference. It's not redemption. Elena Sullivan isn't there to witness his transformation, to validate his growth, to forgive his past. Richard has to live with the knowledge that some damage can't be undone. Some words can't be taken back. Some respect, once lost, may never be regained. But he also learns that change doesn't require an audience. Growth doesn't need external validation. Sometimes the most important transformations happen in silence, witnessed only by the person doing the changing. 6 months later, Richard reads an article in a literary journal. The author is Dr. Elena Sullivan, and the piece explores the experience of multilingual service workers in American restaurants. It's brilliant, incisive, and devastating in its quiet analysis of power, assumption, and linguistic invisibility. Richard recognizes himself in the carefully anonymized examples, not by name, but by behavior, by the casual cruelty of speaking about someone in a language you assume they don't understand. The article ends with a simple observation. True bilingualism isn't just about speaking multiple languages. It's about understanding multiple worlds, multiple perspectives, multiple ways of being human. Those who speak only the language of privilege often find themselves truly speechless when confronted with the eloquence of those they've dismissed. Richard cuts out the article and keeps it in his wallet, not as a reminder of his shame, but as a recognition of Elena Sullivan's brilliance, her strength, her refusal to let his ignorance define her worth. It's the closest thing to closure he'll ever have, and somehow that's enough.